Hi, everybody. Welcome to Abya Yala Update. I'm John Fries, one of the co-hosts. My other co-host, Javier Ramirez, um, is busy today, so he couldn't join us. But today we are fortunate to have an Indigenous elder from Northern Turtle Island, Northern Abya Yala, Rose. What name do you go by, Rose? What's your... Yeah.
Grandma Osa,
Okay. So Grandma Osa, who is from what?
Tla'amin.
Say again?
Tla'amin is a part of the Coast Salish territory.
Right. Okay. So she's from that area, which is the colonizer calls it Vancouver Island, but you're saying, yeah, coastal Salish Indians. That's where you're coming from.
Yes.
Okay. Were you born and raised there in that area?
I was born in the Salish territory, yes.
Right. Okay. And so, where is the Salish territory traditionally? What area does it cover?
Um, well, this Salish territory is so huge. It's about one third of the size of British Columbia. So we have the interior Salish as well
Hmm.
as the Coast Salish. And Um, so that means right from the Salish Sea all the way into the interior of BC and as far north as Paul River, all the way south into Portland, Oregon.
Okay. And so, what language or languages are spoken by the Salish?
The main language here on Vancouver Island is Hulkamanian, but
Hmm.
our territory consists of 69 different dialects.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. And so is it organized by um, different bands, or how would you say the would you call it a single tribe with multiple bands, or how would you describe it?
Um, the territory consists of many different nations.
Hmm.
Each nation has its different dialect
Hmm.
and has its different traditional practices.
Right, right. And so, do you speak the language?
No,
Hmm.
um, because I lost that ability when I was taken from my mother's community as a child. I call that the movement of, you know, the genocide that our governments have been imposing on us as Indigenous people,
Right,
breaking the spirit of the Indigenous people and introducing the Indian Act.
right. Did you have to go to a boarding school when you were taken from your mother? Where were you taken?
I was placed in a permanent foster care home.
Okay, right. And they were not indigenous,
Nope.
right? So you had to learn English from them,
Yes.
right? So is the language, how many people now speak the language?
Very few people speak the language, and even fewer people actually practice the tradition.
Right, meaning the cultural practices that go with the language.
Yes. So I would say less than maybe 15% of our relatives speak and practice the
Right,
tradition.
right. So has the language been preserved in terms of a dictionary or oral recordings or something like that?
Um, on the internet, there's a website called First People's Voices.
Hmm.
Um, and on that website, it has both the audio as well as the uh, written dictionary. But, that's not the same as being able to speak it with your own family. And that's where the colonizing law impacted us because our grandparents and our great grandparents were punished for speaking our language. And that punishment meant that, they were being sent to jail or they were being physically assaulted. And the people that were assaulting them were never punished.
Right, right, right. So the living language was severely repressed.
That's right.
Hmm. And we can say because of colonialism, and so the worldview of dogmatic Christianity, dogmatic scientific materialism, Western imperialism wanting to move in and take over in terms of the land and resources. Um, all of this uh, Western imperialism, we could say, is what's driving it.
Yes. Western imperialism that has the tainted seed of greed.
Right,
And, the imperialism is so greedy that we're losing our land and our children because of their greed. And it's not just us indigenous people that are losing. The world is losing with the toxic contamination of this greed.
right. So my background is in Buddhism, and I've also done work comparing Buddhism with body-centered trauma therapy. And so
Mhm.
I see like just like an individual can be traumatized and then they're acting out through trauma and addiction. I think collectively, this is my hypothesis that Western imperialism has inside of it some kind of trauma that has caused a collective trauma and addiction. So what you're saying, this greed, I see it as like a sickness or
Yep,
uh, an unresolved trauma that causes people in the system to become traumatized and then have this insatiable greed because they're empty inside or they're broken inside. Then there's this insatiable greed that causes the conquest and the destruction. Um, do you have a similar view?
I have
Um,
a very similar view. Like their trauma, um, they're suffering because they've lost their own culture. But now, they're trying to make it so that we suffer at the hands of their trauma. And so when they're lashing out, um, they're taking their trauma out on us, and it's causing a new level of destruction and hurt amongst um, a group of people that were once peaceful, loving people, and those people are us indigenous people. For decades, we were told that carry peace and love in our hearts, and we'll make it through the day. Now it's like it's a rarity to find a person that actually carries that because we're always having to be um, you know, on guard, protecting what little we do have.
right. And before we started recording, you were talking about now in Canada, they're passing new laws to be able to come in and do even further extractivism in terms of the resources and oil, etc. So it's this continuous violence against the land and the people.
Yes. Um, you know, in June of 2025, our Prime Minister has now passed a bill through Parliament that states that um, the corporations have the right to move in to our territories without consulting Indigenous people, and they can remove or extract all the resources from our territory. What they want from us is our land, our water, our traditional foods, our trees, everything that we honor and we cherish to ensure our survival. Um, the federal government has said we're going to give free passage to all the corporations. And when that passage passes through the third reading at the Senate level, if the Senate agrees to this, the corporations will have the right to come in and remove all the Indigenous people from the right to defend their land. And so, to ensure that this bill passes, the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has authorized the expense of building new jails. And so the new jails, there's 10 brand new federal prisons being built right now. Um, 10 of them, so one per province, and at $70 million each. And I'm right away, my old activist brain says they're building it really close to where the pipelines are going. The same pipelines that are going east and going west are also traveling to Texas. And the pipeline for it to run the gas through the pipes requires fresh water, and they're draining the fresh waters from our lakes where our salmon and our bears and our old growth need that water to continue to grow. So what the federal government has done has said, okay, we're giving you all this money to build these jails, and industry has got the green light to come through and arrest every Indigenous person along these pipelines just so that they can have free passage. So we, the Indigenous people, have been standing in solidarity with one another to say, hey, you're a water protector, you're a land defender, you're an environmentalist. And we've gone through the list and said, we need each other. We need to learn to stand together in solidarity um, to save our nations and to save a future for the next 7 generations. And the corporations, they don't look at those 7 generations, nor do they look at how valuable our life is. So here, we have the federal government saying, well, here's the money, build the jails, and by the way, here's the permit to build those pipelines that are going, north to south so that the US can have some gas.
Right. And
And we're like, they're doing this without our permission. and without us
Mhm.
benefiting from what they're doing. So profiting, nobody's
Mhm.
profiting off of this but the governments.
Right, and the rich people that make money off of it. And then, like you said, then it's both the liberal and the conservative governments are doing it. It's not just the um, like Javier and I talk about how both the liberals and the conservatives are both actually right wing. Like the liberals just have some
Yeah,
they just have some bourgeois identity politics, but at the end of the day, they also are behind the extractivism and the continued
yes,
colonialism.
yes.
Um, yeah. And that so this like to me, Western imperialism has two core ideologies. That there's dogmatic scientific materialism, which actually started with Aristotle and the Greek Empire. And then
Hmm.
you have the Christianity with which of course starts with in terms of the imperialism, the Roman Catholic Church. So it's the dogmatic scientific materialism, which most of the liberals believe, and then the dogmatic Christianity, which most of the conservatives believe. But both of them are the ideologies behind the Western imperialism.
Hmm.
And they say they represent civilization, and then but when in actual reality, they're the ones that are the barbarians. They're the ones that are the uncivilized.
Yep, that's true.
And to me, then
So,
that means, um, oh, go ahead. What were you going to say?
so what does that mean? That's what I was going to ask you.
Oh, okay. That the liberals and the conservatives are both acting on behalf of capitalism. Western imperialism, going back to the Greek and Roman Empire, destroyed indigenous culture within Western Europe in terms of the language and the cultural practices. And so it got replaced with the dogmatic Christianity and then the dogmatic scientific materialism. So everyone that goes through the Western education system, they become um, de-indigenized. If you go through the Western education system, you're disconnected from the land, you're disconnected even from your own body.
Yeah.
You get your knowledge or the software inside your computer is this Western imperial software, basically. Um,
Mhm.
and so then in terms of the culture, in terms of the institutions, then it's the education system, it's the healthcare system, and it's the government itself, and it's the industry. It's all institutionalized. And whereas if you are an indigenous person trying to fight against the system, or um, if you're a European American or a European Canadian who wants to fight against the system, there's no institutional basis from which to fight against. Um, so to me, that means then the the tribal institutions need to be strengthened and supported,
Yeah.
and um, the existing institutions that have been run by capitalism and colonialism, they have to be taken over. The institutions either have to be taken over or they have to be done away with, and new institutions have to be created. Um,
But if
yeah,
they create a new institution, it needs to be created with the inclusiveness of the indigenous people of Turtle Island.
right,
And right
right,
now, the current institutions, as they are, were created without our input.
right,
Can
right.
I ask, is this being recorded? Because I don't see the recording button.
Um, yeah, it's being recorded.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just because I didn't see it and I was like, oh, I
Uh,
should
yeah, we're
double
recording.
check. Uh, okay, so with the institutions, um, you know, they didn't really want us to survive. They didn't want us to survive, so they went ahead and enforced their institutional thinking from their homelands and their homelands, which is the place where their ancestors had been kicked out of their homeland. And most of the people that arrived here on Turtle Island um, had criminal backgrounds, and so they brought um, that criminal thinking and said, "Well, this is our new home now, and we're going to implement our own laws, and um, they're going to teach us Indigenous people how to behave." And we're like, "Wait a minute, we have our own law here, and our law says that we should be here to protect and preserve the land and all its resources that keep us alive." And um, the colonial law didn't understand that because they would look outside and they would see thousands of acres of trees and they would see the running water and never see that those resources were going to run out. And we were taught only to take what we needed, not what we wanted. And the corporations were like, we're going to take, 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 and not give back. And so this is the trouble that we're in right now is that the corporate greed has taken more than what they need and not giving back to the land. And um, for this action, um, the indigenous people are suffering at the hands of colonialism and they're being made criminals for defending that land. And we're like, we're not the criminals. We've been
Right.
taught to save it.
Right. And so again, it's because of this trauma or sickness within the Western psyche that has this insatiable greed and it doesn't know any limit or balance. Um, so it's if you try to disrupt their, if you try to get in the way of them satiating their greed, that's they become extremely violent because if it's like someone who has an addiction, if you try to stop them from getting hold of their drugs, they're going to get violent on you because uh, they can't they're so addicted they can't handle not having it all the time.
That's right.
Yeah,
And so I think that, this fight for defending the land, has a direct connection to what is happening currently with the wars in, you know, um, Palestine, with the interference of the outside world, like the latest thing is like Trump stepping in and doing his shenanigans yesterday. Yesterday being June 21st, we heard that, that there was bombs being sent in, and I'm like, we're leading into another World War III or IV.
yeah.
There's
They
always
bombed
been a war.
Iran. There were some V2 bombers that bombed Iran.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
So,
it's both domestic and foreign is insatiable greed and destruction. It's yeah, that the greed for the resources, but also like a bloodlust just to kill. Like they're addicted to killing also.
exactly. And they want to instill some fear into um into the indigenous people well, not even just the indigenous. They want to instill fear into everybody that, if you don't behave and comply with our wishes, this is going to happen to you. And, um, that's dictatorship.
Yeah.
And I'm like, indigenous people have been living under this rule of thumb for like since colonization. And, so, you know, bring it on. We're going to still be here. We're still going to be fighting for our land, for not only our land, but our rights to our culture, for our language, um, for pretty well everything. We're going to be here. And I have this saying that I've been talking to people by the thousands about, the actions that we've done with preserving our old growth here at Fairy Creek. Um, we're now we're a little tribe of we call ourselves the Rainbow Nation. The Rainbow Nation consists of many, many people from Scotland to um, Ireland to Peru. We've had East Indians, Chinese. Everybody has come together under one umbrella of the old growth to save our old growth. We have trees up here that are more than 2,000 years old, and we're trying to save them. And so we called ourselves the Rainbow Nation, and we're saying we're coming together, we're uniting. Um, it's called Natsama in our language. Natsama, meaning it's time for us to act as one. And we're going to save this old growth. We're going to save it. And the Canadian government has said that because of our actions for the last 4 years, we have cost the Canadian government over $66 million because we're not backing down. We blockaded logging trucks that are taking our old growth, and they're actually taking it across the border to Washington State, and they're cutting it into wood for, building houses and paper, etc. And that. So we're like, no, we're not going to let you take our old growth, right? Well, um, the $66 million has gone into the communities uh, where our RCMP and the Community Industrial Response Team, CURG, um, have been sent in. They sent in the Marines to arrest us. They've sent in, um, you know, private security to come in and investigate and to spy on Indigenous people. And who's profiting off of having all these people come to their communities? The small business people, uh, the community halls where the police have been allowed to set up their beds and everything, places where land defenders, indigenous people are not welcome to go to. So we're not benefiting from it, but the community is making an atrocious amount of money.
Yeah, it's like an industry in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it's like, oh, okay. The federal government is now um, saying, okay, you made Teal Jones. Teal Jones is a corporate logging company that went bankrupt because of us. So they declared bankruptcy, and um, now they're suing us. They're suing us land defenders. 15 land defenders are being sued $10 million.
Wow.
And so now we're going through the courts. This will be 4 years now. We've been fighting in the court system, practicing the natural law, which is indigenous law, versus colonial law. And, this is the power of our people. Our land defenders are standing up and saying, let's bring it on. We're going to court. We're going to change the rules. We're fighting the colonial system and we're paying with our lives. And the judges, they don't know what to do with us now. We're like, okay. So, that's the hope. That is the hope
Right.
that, we're at right now, is that we're creating social change, but we're not changing it by ourselves. I've told people over the years that, you know, us Indigenous people did not make the mess that we're in right now. It needs allies. We need our allies to come together and help clean up their own mess because it's our allies, our invaders, our colonial people that made the mess. They got to be treated like a 2-year-old who's taught how to clean things up. Colonizers need to be taught
Yeah,
to clean up their mess.
yeah, the the liberals have proven unable to help, and like we've said, in fact, they've actually been part of the problem.
Yep,
And so, to me, this gets to, hit the history of Western culture, where you have Christianity and then you have science coming out, and a lot of the scientific materialism is based on rejecting the Christianity. So the liberals, their worldview is in many ways based on rejecting Christianity and saying, no, we're not superstitious, we're modern and scientific. So
yep,
they associate the past and anything religious or spiritual as somehow being backwards or uncivilized or whatever.
yep,
And as a result, they've not been able to take seriously indigenous cultures, or people from other religions or different spirituality. They've proven themselves unable to challenge capitalism because they don't get to the root of the problem, which is what we're talking about, the Western imperialism that's at the root of it. So to me, we need, what I say is we need spiritual communalism or spiritual communism, if you will. There needs to be spirituality and communalism, and it needs to be supporting indigenous culture. And then, yes, in terms of modernity and industrial technology and things like that, it's like it's not inherently bad, but it's been used in a bad way. So
yep,
it's okay to have science, but it can't be this nonstop extractivism. It has to be science that is grounded in some kind of spirituality and communalism. So we have to get out of capitalism. We have to get into some kind of socialism, but the socialism also can't be a dogmatic scientific materialism. The socialism also has to have a spirituality and a recognition of indigenous culture as well. Um, and so that to me is like in America, we have the Republicans and the Democrats, and both of them are proving to be horrible. So we need a workers' party, and the workers' party also has to have some kind of indigenous or spiritual worldview inside of it as well. It can't just be the traditional communism, which has tended not to be able to recognize the indigenous culture. The traditional communism also has that problem of thinking that there's this progress where the past is there's a lack of technology or a lack of it's always saying there has to be a progress, and it's a there you still end up with a disconnection from the past. So to me, we need a socialism or a communism that has an industrial technology, but that also is not disconnected from the past, that's able to recognize the indigenous culture. And so then we have a spiritual communalism that is what's able to bring everybody together. So that's kind of for me as a non-indigenous person, I'm saying, yeah, we need to come together and have solidarity around a collectivism and a spirituality. And that needs to come from indigenous culture in terms of language and practice. And then for me as a Buddhist, I'm also interested in bringing in Buddhist spirituality and Buddhist communalism. I used to be a Buddhist monk. I was a Buddhist monk for 12 years, and we lived very communally. As a monk in a monastery, we live very communally. Um, and so I guess that's
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying is, from my perspective, that's another way that I want to bring everybody together.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what we did at Fairy Creek is that we brought people together, and a lot of the people lived in the woods. We lived there for a number of months. Rain or shine or snow, we were there. And we built things like a community kitchen and a first aid clinic. And um, we had food that was being brought in from the local farmers who, would say, just tell us where we can drop this food off at, and we'll make sure that you get it, right? And food and clothes. And we even brought in musicians. Some very famous musicians came and gave us a free concert. And so, food, music, and art is what brought the people together. And, the infrastructure, the basic rules were pretty simple. They were pretty simple for people to listen to, but people struggled with the concept of following the leadership of Indigenous elders and matriarchs. They didn't understand how, they could follow these rules because they came into camp with the idea that, that they could govern themselves, which was good that they could govern themselves, but they couldn't govern an entire community. And um, that was the struggle that us two elders from Fairy Creek had to deal with every day. But, we made it through a lot of turmoil because we were hanging on to that old tradition. Matriarchs governed everything in our territory. Even the hereditary chiefs had to follow the rules of their matriarchs. And so, to bring that into that level of activism today, um, yep, the matriarchs are struggling with having their voices heard because the colonial law doesn't follow the rules of matriarchs. And um, I think the colonial people don't follow the rules of matriarchs because they've been removed from their own um, national or hereditary rights. Um, so, you know, I think about that in the context of like they've been removed from their mother, from their traditional languages. So, you know, we have to bring people back together, and that is through music and art and food, and bring in a lot of patience.
Um, so in my study and practice of Buddhism, I created a, a theoretical framework So I call four modes of knowledge production. And so this is to talk about the history of Buddhism and how it's come into the modern era. And
Hmm.
so I say there's a village shamanic mode of knowledge production, and that's the pre-Buddhist village-based culture that was in Northeast India. Um, it wasn't Hinduism, it was some kind of indigenous tribal culture in Northeast India. It was not Hinduism.
Hmm.
So that was the village shamanic mode. Then early Buddhism, you have what I call the city-state yogic mode of knowledge production. So there were a network of city-states, and the early Buddhism was yogic spiritual practice because it's based on mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of the body, cultivating the breath energy, uh, getting in touch with the heart mind, and then opening up to a deeper spiritual ground. Then you have the clerical scholastic. So that's when Buddhism added the reading and writing. And so
Yeah.
that was, you had monarchies and then the reading and writing. So that's the later Buddhism that's more like the philosophical teachings.
Hmm.
Then you have the modern nation state academic mode of knowledge production. So that's the modern study of Buddhism within nation states, and it's using academic study. So I have village shamanic, city-state yogic, clerical scholastic, and then nation-state academic. And so what I say is what's good and bad about each layer, and what would be the ideal combination of those four modes of knowledge production. Um, so say here in Turtle Island, we have indigenous culture that was village based, but we also have some cultures that develop cities. So what was the knowledge production at the village level and the city level? And then, yes, the colonialism came in. You had the colonial Christianity, and then you have the modern nation state academic modes. And so obviously there's tons of problems with those. So, but to be realistic, we can just say, okay, what's good and bad about the Christianity? What's good and bad about the modern science? And how can that be put in relationship with the pre-colonial indigenous uh, knowledge production, we can say. Um,
Hmm.
so that's my idea is we need a framework that can recognize the different layers. And then instead of saying, the more recent layer is better than all the previous layers, we should stop thinking like that. It should be, here's these layers and what's good and bad about each one. Um,
Yeah.
and so for example, like in the modern nation state academic knowledge production, you'll have the white feminism that thinks it's only been the modern feminism that recognized violence against women. They'll say that there's always been violence against women since the beginning of time, and it's only the modern feminism that's discovered the violence against women, and therefore we all have to bend the knee to the modern feminism, right? And as opposed to Native American women scholars who will say, no, the violence came with the colonialism. Before colonialism, we didn't have this kind of violence against women. Like you're saying, we had matriarchal culture. We did not have this kind of violence. So there has to be um, exposing or calling out the modern liberal perspective, thinking that it's the latest and greatest, when no, it's not. It's not the latest and greatest. So anyway, so what do you think then about this idea of like these different layers and what's good and bad about each layer and how can we have like an ideal like combination?
Follow the matriarchs. Um, but
Right? Yeah.
um, because you know, the colonial people like to have it mapped out, like visual mapping.
Yeah,
Um, most indigenous people that I know of, because we follow the oral traditions.
yeah.
We bring our entire, like families in our community come together and we relay the messages through our songs and through our actions. And when we do this, this could take hours or could take days to do this. But um, at this time in our lives, it probably will have to be done a lot faster. So, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to meet you on the bridge halfway. And, we can do both, the visual mapping and the physical presence. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so we need to turn around and say, okay, well, when do we need to have this done by? I would say, like before the next generation comes around. Um, but in the colonial world, it's like the timeline is before next Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it would have to have a lot of meetings.
Yeah, I think it's a revival of the oral tradition and then transformation of the education system. So, like people in the teachers union and well, both education and healthcare, I think. So, like the public education system in America has to be radically transformed so that it actually includes indigenous oral tradition as part of the overall education. And so that the science is put in its place, or the Western knowledge is put in its place. Um, so the public schools should be teaching indigenous language. It should be teaching like how do you actually relate to the land. Um, like for me as a Buddhist, I also want people like the early Buddhism is also oral tradition, and like people need to learn meditation, they need to learn yoga, they need to learn how to be in touch with their body, they need to learn like healing themselves, um,
Hmm.
and that this should be part of the education and healthcare. It shouldn't that yeah. So to me, there has to be a radical transformation, um, and so then the indigenous oral tradition should be supported and revived. And then it should also be part of the overall education system. So that would be
Yeah.
like how to transform the institutions, I guess.
Yeah,
Because sitting at a desk all day long and learning reading and writing is not good for anybody.
exactly. Yeah,
If you don't know how to grow food, how to make shelter, how to work with plants, how to relate to the natural world, if you don't know those things, you're not getting an education.
that's right. Yep. It's time, for us to get our hands dirty and
Mm.
get reconnected to our mother. Our number one mother is her name's Earth. We need to get reconnected. And so when we were doing the land occupation at Fairy Creek, there was a time during the day that we'd all get into a circle and we would sing some songs and we would relay some messages that needed to be relayed. And um, a lot of people would start singing and dancing. And
Mhm.
I would actually encourage them to do that. If that's what your heart is telling you to do, then, let's do it because, the Creator has said, you know, um, with each step that you take, you're sending a prayer to the ancestors. And I'm like, okay, like this is what we need. And then there was a time that, we did prayer and meditation. It
Hmm.
wasn't for very long each day, but we did it because we asked people to, calm down, get yourself recentered, prepare for what is about to come. And that was usually when we were going to tell them that the police were on their way and
Yeah.
to be prepared. And that worked. That worked with the people knowing as much as they could in advance.
Hmm.
But, you know, to have the thousands of people that would come up to the land, some people struggled with the silence. There's like, because up in the mountains, there's no electricity, there's no cars running by. The convenience store is conveniently 10 miles down the road. And people were like, oh my goodness, like I actually slept. It would take them 2 or 3 nights before they actually slept through the night. And then to wake up in prayer, it was like, wow, like here we are. We're together sleeping under one tent with total strangers who were there for the same reason that you were there for.
Yeah. So it's this reconnection to the body, reconnection to the land, reconnection to each other, and then that naturally includes a spiritual dimension, which is in the connection with the earth, and then, as you're saying, also the silence that's there.
Yep.
And that, from a Buddhist perspective, the idea that, yeah, you have to get in touch with your body, and when you get in touch with your body, your suffering is going to come up, and then you
Hmm.
have to know how to heal that suffering so that you can
Yeah.
come home to your body, so that you're not in exile from your body.
Yeah.
And that's real education right there.
A lot of patience
Yeah,
so that people can get the real education.
yeah. Um, so do you have any website or anything you want people to have their attention drawn to?
I want people to have their attention drawn to the issues that are surrounding each and every one of us. And that is, first of all, our connection to the land
Hmm.
and, you know, all the resources. How are we treating our Mother Earth? Are we treating her respectfully? Are we saying thank you to her for all the gifts that she's given us each and every day? Um, to, like when we go to the next stages of defending our Mother Earth, we have to learn to let go of our personal differences and stand in solidarity with one another, no matter, you know, how different our beliefs are. Like up here, we have a lot of people saying we can't go to the Palestinian rally because those are Palestinians. What is happening over there doesn't affect us here. And then we have other people that are saying, you know, you're a land defender, I'm a water protector. They're different. Oh my goodness. The water protectors are standing in the way of pipelines. What does that have to do with the rest of the world? And so set aside our personal differences, whether you're male or female, young or old, if you come from a different ethnic background, we all breathe the same air. We all get our food from the same resources. We all cannot live without water. We cannot live without air. I actually, taught one lesson to a group of people about we can go weeks without food, we can go weeks without water. We can only go 6 minutes without air. So environmental issues affect each and every one of us. So, indigenous people, um, because of colonization dividing us, some of us were buying into this corporate greed. Some of us were like, no, 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 we don't need to buy that corporate greed. So we need to set aside those personal differences and understand those basic elements is what keeps us alive. We cannot breathe toxic air. We cannot drink toxic water because without those two elements, we'll die. And so I've gone through this whole lesson that I've created to say these are the most important things. So coming together for food, music, and art, that's critical because, when we're doing artwork, we can relax and be more receptive to the teachings because there is no plan B. There's not an alternative plan for what is left of Mother Earth. The cultural genocide on Indigenous people is alive, it's real. We have a right to exist. And we need our allies to come together with us to preserve what is left. So that is my message to the rest of the world that the state that we're in right now, the time is now for us to come together and show our solidarity. So we don't need to wait for our governments to tell us when to come together. We need to do it by reaching out to each other. That's the message.
Mhm. Yes. And I think it's to preserve what we have left and to hold off the current emergency, but then also to connect with each other and then envision what is it that we want.
Yep.
Um, we have to, yeah, we have to envision what we want to overcome the emergency in the short term, and then in order to build a long-term future.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining today. And
Yep. And I
um,
look forward to chatting with you guys even more.
yes, we will definitely keep you as a regular guest and try and figure out how our communities can interact with each other online and in person.
All right. Amawega. That means until next time.
Okay,
Oh,
cool.
okay.